I am so excited to be here. Thank you guys for joining me this evening, morning, afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I've really been looking forward to this because we're going to be talking about one of my absolute favorite topics, which is technical writing. So, without further ado, I am going to jump right in to today's presentation, Technical Writing, Your Engineering Superpower. I'm going to give you guys just a little bit about me before we jump into the content. So, hi, I am Sophie. I'm a senior engineer at GitHub. I'm also the co-author of Programming Phoenix LiveView, which is out in beta from Pragmatic Bookshelf right now. I write my own technical blog at thegreatcodeadventure.com. You guys can check that out. I have one very strange dog named Moby, and you can find me on Twitter at SM_DeBenedetto. Also, no presentation is complete without a picture of said strange dog. So that's him just being really normal and hanging out in the sunshine. All right, so what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what technical writing is, why it matters to you, and how you can do it well. So 3 parts to today's talk. And we'll just jump right in. So, what is technical writing? I think there's 2 things that really come to mind for people when they hear the phrase technical writing, and it's blogging and books. But I'm really hoping to drive home something to you today, which is that it is a lot more than just blogging and writing books, should you ever choose to write a technical book. It is writing project proposals and pull requests and GitHub issues and Jira tickets and Stack Overflow posts and even the Slack messages that you write to your classmates or teammates to, get help with a bug. That's technical writing too. So you're pretty much already doing it every day. So technical writing is everywhere in your professional life. Writing code is really just one part of being a developer. It's an important part, but it's just one part. You also have to be able to write about code. So that was a little taste of why technical writing matters, but I want to talk about that in much greater detail now. And I want to start with that really obvious one. The first thing that I think comes to mind for many, many people when you hear the phrase technical writing, and it's writing technical blog posts. So I do want to talk about this topic, and I want to convince you why you should blog. So many reasons, really. So you will be helping some future developer out there in the world solve a problem, and you'll be creating a resource that you can reference in the future too. Honestly, really, like 8 out of the 10 blog posts I write, I end up looking up at some point in the future to remind myself about how to do something, however simple that thing might be. Further, by building up educational resources, you're contributing to a supportive and nurturing community. Many of us are beginners, or we've all been beginners at some point, or even if you're a very experienced engineer, you'll be a beginner when you switch to a new language or a new framework, and you're going to want those resources that really meet you where you're at in your learning journey. So it's really important, and it's really an incredible thing to be able to give back to the community by sharing what you have learned, what you are currently learning. And another reason I think I'm truly convinced that writing technical blog posts will make you smarter. There is no better way to learn than to teach. Explaining what you've learned, having to articulate it in detail really helps you go even deeper on something that has, finally clicked for you or that you've recently learned. Aside from that, it's fun. Your blog is totally your own. It's not like, the pull requests or the code you write at work or the assignments that you might be submitting if you're a student, or even the work you might be doing with a mentor. It's really just for you. Your blog is totally yours. You can use any examples you want, any fun pop culture references, all the pictures of cats that you desire, or perhaps the pictures of dogs. So I think it's kind of a fun experience, especially once you get into the swing of it. But above all, and I really think that this is probably the key main reason to at least occasionally write your technical blog, blogging makes you a better technical writer. And you need to be a good technical writer because of so many reasons, right? You need to be a good technical writer because you will need to write PR descriptions likely at some point in your career, right? Your pull requests can only get merged if your teammates can review them. And they can only review them if they know what problem the code solves and how. And this is where your PR description comes in. You need to be a good technical writer because at some point you're going to have to write things like GitHub issues, Jira tickets, Trello cards, Pivotal tickets, whatever the project management flavor at your particular team or organization is. And things like Jira tickets can only get delivered if the developer who picks them up can understand the work that needs to be done. And that's where a well-written ticket description comes in. I think probably many of us have tried to work on tickets or issues that were a little bit vague or unclear, and it's really, really hard to deliver that work in a way that is successful. So at some point, I'm pretty confident that you'll find yourself responsible for writing up work like this. And we need to be able to speak clearly about the code that needs to be written and the problems that need to be solved. You need to be good at technical writing because at some point you're going to find yourself writing technical design or project documents. So your great idea to solve a certain technical problem or to deliver a particular feature set can't get implemented if it doesn't get communicated. So you'll find yourself responsible for writing design docs or project proposals very likely over the course of your career. We're going to talk a little bit more about what that means in a few minutes. You need to be a good technical writer because we all need help. I'm not going to say every day, but I usually ask for help with a bug or something I'm unclear on pretty much every day, whether it's from a teammate, that's on my team, whether it's from another team over Slack or Stack Overflow. So your request for help, right, in debugging, in trying to understand something better, whether you're on Slack, writing a Stack Overflow post, wherever, that request for help is only as successful as it is well written. No one can help you if they don't understand what the problem is. And it's up to you to communicate the thing that you need help with. And once again, a lot of the time you're going to be doing that in writing. So, in other words, writing is part of your everyday life as a developer, and sharpening your writing skills are going to make you a more successful dev. So hopefully I've convinced you that technical writing is everywhere. It's not just about writing blog posts or writing books. You probably already do a fair bit of it in your daily life without even realizing it. And so now let's talk about how you can do it well, how you can do technical writing really successfully. So I want to go back to that very first topic of interest when we talk about technical writing, and it's how to blog. So there are two steps in the blogging process. It's not very, very complicated. It's actually fairly simple. Step one is pick a topic, and step two is write about it. And I know that an oversimplification is really just that. It's an oversimplification. So we'll dig into these a little bit. Picking a topic can definitely be hard, and I totally get that. I think that especially if you're somebody that wants to set yourself a goal, oh, I'm going to write a blog post, a month or twice a month or once every 3 months. Now I've got to sit down and pick a topic. It can be really, really hard to do that. So I do have a couple of tips and pieces of advice for trying to come up with things to write about. I love to say that you should start small with something that you learned or that recently clicked for you. So if you ever have one of these aha moments, a point in the day where something just finally comes together, try to notice that moment and even just make a note of it for a future blog post. Something challenging of any size, whether it's super, super tiny, something that you got stuck on, or a big project that you tackled that took you a while to solve, is also a really great source of inspiration for writing blog posts. I always advise that folks write the resource you wish you had. So if you ever basically have a really bad day where you can't figure something out, you're Googling it a million times, you're going through Stack Overflow, and you finally get something working and you kind of look back and you say, I wish somebody had just told me X. That makes an awesome blog post. You are guaranteed to be not the only person in the world that had that frustration, that wished they had, resource X, blog post X, Stack Overflow, solution Y. So write the resource you wish you had. Other ideas would be like a walkthrough of a personal project. If there's something that you're hacking on in your free time, try to look to that for inspiration. It doesn't have to be like one giant blog post that walks through the entire project. You can pick and choose little pieces of it, maybe how you added a specific feature, or you could even write a less technical post that kind of just discusses your overall journey through the whole project. So some ideas for topics. Of course, I'm sure you may come across your own in your own time. Writing about it. First step is to pick a platform and set up your personal blog. If you haven't already, I really recommend using something like Medium or Dev2. Dev2 is great because it's all free. It's a very opening and supportive community, in my opinion. And I really suggest sticking with something that is designed for blogging rather than setting up your own website from scratch and hosting it and maintaining it and designing the whole thing. I'm not going to stop you if you're really excited to take on a project like that, but I think technical writing blogs is hard enough as it is, coming up with topics, taking the time to sit down and actually write something. So give yourself the luxury of focusing on just that piece of the challenge. And in my opinion, just use a blogging platform that already exists. Again, that's my 2 cents. Of course, if you're really excited about setting up GitHub Pages or Jekyll or one of these more hand-rolled solutions, of course, go for it and do whatever is interesting to you. And then another thing that I'll touch on is your writing style. How you approach your blog post writing is also totally up to you, but a couple of different approaches that you might want to try out. Sometimes people find it really helpful to sit down and write their full introduction first. Other people prefer to sketch out an outline before they write any full sentences or paragraphs. Or, hey, maybe even try writing the conclusion first, right? If you get down on paper what it is that you want someone to take away from your post, that can be a really helpful way to start. So I think it's helpful to pick some of these strategies and just try out different ones and see what works for you, because blank page syndrome, right? Sitting down and staring at like the white expanse of a page is definitely a tough hurdle to get over, but picking some of these specific strategies I think can really help. Okay, so we talked about how to blog, and now I'm going to talk about how to do some of the other types of technical writing that I am fairly sure that you either have encountered or will encounter in your career as a developer. First up is how to write a PR description. So, the first thing I want to say is that different teams, companies, organizations are going to have different specific strategies for writing things like PR descriptions, issues, whatever. And that's totally fine. And that's great. And I think there are still a couple of takeaways that I would love for you to keep in mind when you're writing your PR description. Pick a descriptive title. You want to make sure that it's really obvious when someone's looking at the title of your PR what the code is that you're introducing, what problem it solves, what it's contributing to the code base. And then I would really love for your PR description, the body of the PR, to include the what, the why, and the how. So something about what problem the code solves, why you're introducing this code, and how the code solves the problem. And then you might want to touch on some extras. If you're introducing a particular tool that needs to be used or run in a certain way, put some usage instructions in there. If you're introducing a brand new user-facing feature, it's always awesome to talk about how you tested it or QA'd it, add in any screenshots about what somebody would expect to see, how the feature will behave, what it looks like once it gets merged into the code base. So again, your team might have a very specific structure for their PRs, maybe even a template that pops up automatically when you open a pull request. And that's great. And you can totally stick to that, and you should. But if you just keep the stuff in mind, make sure that somewhere along the way you're communicating the what, the why, and the how. I think you're going to end up with a really solid PR description that your teammates are going to find really easy to read. You want to basically just give your team all the tools that they need to provide a really meaningful review. And it's very, very difficult to just read code and figure out really constructive feedback to give someone. So just tell them upfront what code you're adding, why you're adding it, how it solves a particular problem, how it works. Here's an example of a recent PR from my team. The details here totally do not matter. Don't, try to sit here and read every word in this screenshot, but I'll point out a few things. I think this is a fairly descriptive title. I've said that the PR is adding a new service to publish hydro messages. Not important what hydro messages are. And I've got a section for the what, the why, and the how. Again, that's just one way to structure it. Your team might have its own recommendation or its own template, but just keeping these themes in mind is going to be really helpful. There are some resources here. I'll see about getting these slides shared with you guys after the talk today. But even if you just Google how to write a good pull request description, there's a couple of good blog posts out there. And I think both of these would probably come up in the results. All right, so how to write an issue or a ticket. So your team, your organization, your company probably has its own project management flavor. Maybe you use Jira, maybe you use Trello or Pivotal, or maybe like me, you use GitHub Issues to actually document the work on a project. I'm using the language issue here, but really this could just be like fill in the blank, right? How to write a Jira ticket, Pivotal ticket, GitHub issue. I think the main thing you're going to want to focus on if you find yourself in a position of writing tickets or issues is what problem needs to be solved and why, and what value is added to the project by delivering this work. And another pitfall that I think it's really easy to fall into when you're writing things like GitHub issues or Jira tickets is focusing too much on the how. When I first started writing Jira tickets and GitHub issues, I put a lot of information in there about how I thought the code should be written so that whoever it was on my team in the future would pick up this ticket and kind of write exactly the code that I had envisioned. And that ended up being kind of a recipe for disaster because I didn't really know exactly how the code should be written because I wasn't the one writing the code. I was just the one way earlier on in the process thinking about, okay, we need to add a feature, let's say, that allows a user to do X. You really want to leave it up to the decision-making capabilities and the skills of the person who will eventually pick up a ticket or an issue to figure out how to write the code. What you want to focus on is telling them what problem they need to solve and why, and trust your teammates to figure out the code. That doesn't mean that you might not want to add some background, some context, some hints on technical implementation if you have something in mind, but we can trust our colleagues when they pick up work in the future to think through the technical implementations themselves. Here is an example of a template that we happen to use on my team at GitHub. Again, we try to go with a descriptive title, and then we actually have a template that we fill out every time with something that we call a problem statement and a deliverable. The problem statement describes the problem that we need to solve, and the deliverable describes something of the end result. Again, different teams, different organizations are going to have their own templates for things like GitHub issues and Jira tickets. But if you just kind of keep in your mind, what problem do I want someone to solve and what should the end result of this work be? What should be the deliverable or the value that's added? I think you're going to be able to write some pretty robust and some pretty detailed tickets that give your teammates a lot to go on. All right, so how to write a technical design doc. This is its whole own giant topic, and I definitely don't want to sort of like intimidate or scare anyone with what this process is like down the line, but I just wanted to sort of make a few notes about it. So, a technical design document, and again, different organizations, different teams might even have different names for something like this. But in my opinion, a technical design document lays out the technical details of how something will be built and why it should be built this way. It's kind of like an issue or a ticket, but it's even bigger in scope. And this time we are going to focus in on the technical implementation details. And a good technical design doc, in my opinion, explains the problem the design solves and why. It outlines how the code will be written, and it probably even includes some examples. Maybe you even built out some prototypes to really prove that your idea is going to work and demonstrate how it will work. Um, Last topic before we move on, how to write a request for help. I think this is such an important topic because you are never going to stop having to ask for help. Like I said, I ask for help just about every day. This is not, strictly speaking, the purview of beginners. We're always, always, always going to be relying on our teammates and the wider community to help us understand something new, debug really complicated issues. So, getting really good at being able to ask for help is just a really critical skill that is always going to serve you over your career as a developer. So, how to write a request for help. Use specific language to describe the bug and explain what is the current behavior, under what circumstances does the behavior occur, and how does the behavior differ from the expected behavior. And so I'll give you an example of what people like have asked me that I always hold up as an example of what not to do if you're stuck. This is an actual sentence that somebody did ask me a few years ago. Hey, I need help with this thing. And then these were literally the words that came out, and it was, when it doesn't work when you do it like that. And so I had about as much context on this issue as you guys listening to this today. There's not enough information in that request for help for me to be able to provide help. So that really drives home, in my opinion, why it's so, so important to use specific language, describe not only what's happening, but why it's wrong. And I'm going to give you an example now of what I think a really good request for help might look like. And this is an example having to do with like a broken song upload feature on a website. So let's say you're asking your colleague for help. You might want to start by walking them through the current behavior. In other words, describing the bug that you're seeing. So something like when a song is uploading, the progress bar appears, but when the song finishes uploading, the progress bar doesn't go away. It stays there forever. Okay, now we want to describe why that's a bug. It might be obvious to you, but it might not be obvious to the person you're asking for help who isn't really familiar with how it's supposed to behave. So we also want to contextualize the circumstances. We can say this behavior occurs when the song does not upload successfully. When the song does upload successfully, the progress bar correctly goes away. Whereas the desired behavior is that when the upload is not successful, the progress bar should be replaced with an error message and a retry button. So again, this is just one example that kind of drives home, explain the current behavior, explain the circumstances under which it is happening. So when does this bug happen? And then explain the desired behavior. This is a bug because it's supposed to do X, but instead it's doing Y. And this is true of even just speaking to your colleagues, right? Doesn't have to be written. It could be true of slacking a teammate when you're stuck on something, or it could be true of writing something like a Stack Overflow post if you want to post about a question that you have when you're trying to learn something new or debug something that you're working on. A couple of resources. This is a blog post actually that I wrote. This is my blog here, Junior Dev Survival Guide, how to communicate clearly. And then Stack Overflow itself has a nice little guide on how to write the kind of questions that do tend to get a lot of responses. Okay, so now that I scared you with all of the technical writing that you'll have to do as a developer, right? It's not just whether or not you choose to write blog posts, but you've got to, write pull requests and issues, and maybe down the line you'll write technical design docs, and certainly you'll even write questions for help in Slack. So I've scared you with all of that, but I actually have some good news. You're already a technical writer, like I said earlier. You communicate about code already every single day. You already probably write pull requests, or even if you've ever so much as asked somebody for help by writing a Slack message or a Discord message or going on Stack Overflow, you're a technical writer. You already communicate about code every day. So all I'm really asking of you, right? You're going to get plenty of practice writing PRs, issues, and so much more. What I want you to do is treat writing like it's part of your job. It's not just about the code that you write or ship, it's about how you write about that code. It is part of your job. It's not an extra. So if you take the time to practice by publishing even just the occasional blog post, and if you make sure to slow down and really put a lot of thought into your PR descriptions, issues, tickets, requests for help, whatever, then I'm pretty sure that you're going to be an engineer that has a big impact on your team. And that's it for my relatively brief set of slides, because what I really want to do is give you guys a chance to ask questions. So some folks may have put questions in the chat already, but if you feel comfortable coming off mute, I would love to hear from you. I will, however, start in the chat and see. Cool. Okay, so there are 2 questions here already, it looks like. Do I post anything on forum.devtalk.com? Yeah, so I also think that's a great place to post questions if you have them. I tend to go there lately because I am the co-author of a book that's come out with the Pragmatic Bookshelf, and they open up specific topics there for feedback and questions from the book. But I definitely find myself there when I'm Googling questions. And if it leads me to Dev Talk, then I think that's a great place to be as well. So I would put Dev Talk in the same category, maybe as like Stack Overflow if you need help with something, or just kind of a fun place to hang out and talk about code. And a few questions about my book. Yeah, I would love to talk about the book. If people have questions about specifically about that book or about, becoming an author, experiences as an author, by all means, add them into the chat. Or like I said, just come off mute and whatever's on your mind, I'd love to hear it. Why do you think LiveView is the future of Phoenix Framework? Excellent question. A couple of reasons. Basically, it allows you to write fully interactive real-time applications with very little hand-rolled code. It moves the interactivity and the real-time kind of nature that things like Phoenix Channels gives you fully into the LiveView framework. So you don't have to write the boilerplate that you might be used to doing if you're working with Phoenix Channels. And you don't have to bring in a fully fledged JavaScript framework, something like React, to get the interactive nature of a web page and then like connect that on top of that to Phoenix Channels to also make it real time. All of that is pushed into the LiveView framework itself. The developer or the team of developers can keep their mind firmly on the back end. It means that your development cycle times are faster. It makes it easier to test. It makes it easier to remediate bugs. And you can do pretty much everything that you would need to do by way of JavaScript interactivity with just plain LiveView. But if you can't, if you need even more interactivity than that, LiveView also has a JS interop, so it interoperates with JavaScript. There are ways that you can add your own little bits of custom JavaScript on top of that, which means, in my opinion, I think you can do pretty much everything you need to do in LiveView. So I hope that answers that question. Another question here, what would be the first actions you suggest as a manager to enforce the team to improve their technical writing skills? I absolutely love this question from Alfonso. I don't know if you happen to be a manager or if you're looking to provide some feedback or advice to a manager, but this is definitely something I have some opinions on. So I'm not an engineering manager right now. I'm an individual contributor at GitHub, but in my previous role, I was an engineering manager. And I'll tell you about some of the things that we did on my team at the time. My engineering org, which was like around 40 people at the time, did have an engineering blog that our company published. And we had a blog committee, which was just comprised of volunteers. And it rotated every 6 months or so. And the committee held office hours where other people, other engineers on the wider team could come, talk about topics, share their drafts, get feedback, get their content edited. And the committee was responsible for maintaining the blog, which I believe was on Medium. This was the Flatiron School Engineering blog. I think you can still look it up, and editing blog posts and publishing blogs. We made sure as engineering managers that our direct reports were empowered to take the time out of their day and week to write blog posts. So if they needed to block off some time on their calendar, let's say, to do some writing, they absolutely could. And we really encouraged our direct reports to do that. We had an eye on if somebody had just wrapped up a particularly exciting accomplishment or learned something new, I would make sure to recommend to that person that they take the time to write a blog post. I would make sure to help them block off some time on their calendar if they were struggling to do so. Certainly, I wouldn't want to force anybody to write a blog post. It's certainly not for everyone. It's not the only way to practice your technical writing skills. I hope I drove that home a bit today, right? Like there's so many opportunities for you to do technical writing. Every single day, you're going to find yourself doing some technical writing. You don't have to write a blog post, but I think it's fun. I think it's rewarding. And I think it's a great way to become a better technical writer. So I definitely encourage my direct reports to do that, again, by having our engineering organization maintain and publish a technical blog. We had a committee of editors that worked on that. We set aside time for people on our team to write those blog posts. And we just kind of encouraged each other to get excited about the blog. What else? What do I find the most difficult or tricky with LiveView? That's a really hard question because I feel like LiveView makes all the things that I found tricky or difficult so much easier. So I'm somebody that I just personally never got very interested in front end development, whether that was like advanced CSS or really strengthening my JavaScript skills. So anytime I had to do work on the front end, I went a lot slower than other people or struggled there more. So just the fact that I don't have to write any JavaScript if I don't want to makes my life a lot easier. But I will try to come up with something that I found difficult or tricky about LiveView. Actually, yeah. So I think the thing that I found tricky about LiveView isn't necessarily specific to LiveView per se, but it kind of just has to do with code organization, understanding where to put each bit of code that sort of fit into my overall Phoenix app. And I think something that really helped me is something that I learned from my co-author, Bruce Tate, which is this idea of splitting up the core and boundary responsibilities of your application. So the core of your application, think your ecto schemas, and any code that you write to query the database, that is the code that is really predictable and certain. Those are your pure functions. Given the same input, it'll always give you the same output. The boundary code is the code that receives input from the outside world, think user input, and then maybe feeds that into the core in order to get some kind of result. So once I understood how to build a really robust Phoenix context and boundary layer and use it in my LiveView, I found that writing LiveView got a lot easier and that the live views that I was writing became a lot cleaner. So we get into this a lot. It's really woven throughout the entire Programming Phoenix LiveView book. I definitely recommend checking out. But this idea of separating the core and the boundary layer is something that I think has kind of first come into being in the Elixir community in Bruce Tate's previous book, which is called Designing, I think, Elixir Systems with OTP. It's Bruce Tate and James Earl Grice. You can look that up at Prog as well and check it out. What else? Compare working with Phoenix LiveView and Angular. Yeah, so I would say that for the most part, LiveView replaces Angular. I haven't written much Angular in my life. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I did a little bit of work in Angular, so I can't get too much into the details. But with LiveView, you don't need a dedicated front-end framework like Angular or React or anything like that. All of the JavaScript is handled within the LiveView framework. So you don't even really need to write any JavaScript yourself. If there are some specific sort of fancy JavaScript interactions that you want that you can't get with just pure LiveView, you can hook into some of the LiveView lifecycles and add in your own custom JS. But that's really just adding in a little vanilla JavaScript to sweeten the pot, so to speak. It replaces the need for a front-end framework like Angular. And let's see, can you explain what is the innovativeness of Phoenix LiveView solution compared to its predecessors? Yeah, so I think the key here really is that all of the JavaScript is handled for you within the LiveView framework itself. And as a developer, you get to focus 100% of your brain power on the server side. All of the state management and pretty much all the code you write, except for your basic templating code, happens on the server side. All of your tests are written in pure Elixir and exercised in pure Elixir. You don't need a custom JavaScript testing framework to come in. You don't need to kind of figure out some sort of tricky development lifecycle where you need to like spin up a React app and then connect it to your, let's say, Phoenix API on the back end. You don't need to handle tricky deployment life cycles based on having a separate front end and back end. Everything happens server side. Everything is rendered server side. So that makes the development life cycle easier. It makes observability and debugging and bug remediation easier. And I think it makes teams really, really fast and productive. Okay, where does Phoenix LiveView do more work regularly? Yes, 100% on the server side. You're going to basically write no client side code. All of the code you write lives on the server side. All of the templates are rendered on the server side. All of the JavaScript in LiveView is handled for you within the LiveView framework. But like I said, LiveView does support JS interop. So you can write some client-side code to add extra JavaScript interactions if you need to, but that's only if you really need to. So you're not going to find yourself having to do that very, very frequently. Okay. Is it possible to optimize the work that Phoenix LiveView on the server side? So you would advise to optimize, which takes resources and are there any components of Phoenix LiveView? I'm gonna ask Anatoly to maybe either rephrase that or come off mute and ask, 'cause I'm not 100% sure what you're asking with that one. I'll just pause in case you want to come off mute and try to ask that one again. Otherwise, take your time and maybe just try to type it out with some slightly different phrasing. Okay, so we'll give him a moment to think about that, and we'll move on to the next question. In terms of programming languages or framework documentation, which ones would you say are your favorites? It might not surprise you guys to hear that my favorite programming language to work with these days is Elixir, and I think that you really hit the nail on the head here by asking about documentation. Elixir just has such great documentation because it's built into hex docs. There is tooling native to the Elixir language that empowers, allows, encourages library and framework authors to document their code as they go and make it really, really easy to publish that documentation to hex docs with any given hex package. Hex packages are like the little Elixir libraries that you'll use in your Elixir apps for anybody that's not familiar. So personally, I've really been enjoying working with Elixir over the past 2 years because I just think it's a pleasure to write with pattern matching and creating these little functional pipelines of code. I think it's just a beautiful language to write and work with. From more of like, I guess, a business oriented perspective, it solves some of the hardest problems in programming: fault tolerance, scalability, distributed systems. The ecosystem has become more and more robust. You've got great tooling for things like observability, for instance, releases. Releases are built natively into the Elixir ecosystem. Elixir's telemetry libraries turns observability into a first-class citizen for most Elixir apps, open source libraries and frameworks. Like I said, the documentation is great and it's just super fun to work with. So I say Elixir all the way. Okay, other than yours, what are some blogs you would recommend as an example of good technical writing? Oh, such a good question. Um, okay, so I'll type out anybody's name that I remember here. So Nate Berkopek, I believe is his name. Oh, that's gonna get auto-corrected to something that doesn't make any sense. Writes a great Rails blog, and he specifically lately, I think, has been focusing on optimizing performance of Rails applications. But he's got a great backlog of like Ruby and Rails stuff that I think is very approachable. In the Elixir space, I really enjoy Todd Rezadek. I wouldn't say he's necessarily, just like Nate is probably not exclusively a Rails blogger. I wouldn't say that Todd is exclusively an Elixir blogger, but I think he's been writing some great Elixir content lately. But also, if you're, I would say, like, whichever language you're working in the most or that you're interested in, find that language's community newsletter. So I know there's Ruby Weekly, there's like a Golang Weekly. Elixir has Elixir Weekly, and then another one that I'm actually forgetting the name of. But there are already people out there that are trying to solve this problem for us, right? Who can aggregate the best blog posts for me and just like send them to me every week. Sign up for some of these newsletters and maybe start checking out posts that come through that are interesting to you. All right, so can the parameters be optimized? Phoenix LiveView, how your personal advice? I'm not totally sure what you mean by the parameters be optimized, but maybe you're asking about overall Phoenix LiveView performance. So Phoenix LiveView performance is already heavily optimized within the framework itself because of Phoenix LiveView's diffing engine. For example, when it's calculating what differences to render in the view based on changing state, it's already automatically going to change the bare minimum amount of content in the template and only re-render exactly what has changed instead of, something that's changed plus its surrounding content, or let's say the whole page. You can definitely further optimize your Phoenix LiveView by being aware of the load that you're putting on the database. And there are some strategies for working with Phoenix components that make sure that you don't need to make more database calls than are strictly necessary. If you look up the Phoenix LiveView documentation on Phoenix components and the update callback function of Phoenix components, you'll see some more advice about how to optimize Phoenix LiveView performance. All right, so what can I write in my blog post if I want to talk about doing my first meetup talk about iOS development? Great, great question. I love when people are starting to think about what to write. So I think it's kind of up to you. You can take a technical approach and you can start thinking about maybe translating your first meetup talk into a blog post, even if it's going to be pretty short or even if it's going to be a little longer. Or you can take a less technical approach and just kind of talk about your own experiences of giving your first meetup talk, right? How did you prepare? Were you nervous? How did you practice? How did you go? How did it go? What did you learn from that first experience? I think sharing those kinds of journeys are a really, really important part of building up this community. All of us here either are have yet to give our first meetup talk or write our first blog post, or even if we're really done it a few times or done it a million times, it's always really, really helpful to learn from and hear other people's experiences in that space. It kind of reminds us that we're not alone, and it helps us learn from how other people approach these problems and these experiences. Okay, cool. So you have given your first one, but yeah, write about it. Let's hear about it. Okay, cool. Thanks, Anatoly. How much time does it take to write a short-ish blog post from Jacob? That's a tough question because everybody writes differently. If you've written a lot of blog posts, it might go a little bit faster. If you're brand new, it might take you a little bit longer to get started. I would probably start by setting aside something like just an hour to get started. And even if you don't write a single word in that hour, even if you brainstorm, take some notes, and just kind of start envisioning where your blog post is going to go, I think that just kind of gets you into the groove of it a little bit, and it starts getting you familiar with what your own writing process is going to be like. That said, on average, though, I think if you pick a small topic and you have a pretty good sense of what you want to write about, I don't think you need to spend that much time on it. I think one thing I would encourage you to keep in mind is that it doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be a masterpiece, and it certainly doesn't have to be on some kind of mythical topic that no one has ever written about before. Pick something that you learned that was interesting to you, write about it for an hour or two, and then publish it and just kind of see how it goes. And you're going to learn about, how to keep on writing from there. Yeah. This is the follow-up question from Pranav. Apologies if I'm not saying that right. His question about how to write about his first meetup talk, or I'm sorry, I'm not sure if it was your first. Yeah, talking about the experience or the technicals could both work well. I really love hearing about people's experiences, giving talks, writing. I've also seen people write blog posts about what it was like to go through a boot camp, what it was like to have some mentoring experiences, what it was like to start their first dev job. I wrote a post a couple of months ago, or I guess about a year ago. I joined GitHub about a year and a half ago, and that was the first company that I'd ever worked for that was 100% remote. So after about 3 months on my brand new team, where I had actually still never met anyone in person, I sat down and I just wrote a short blog post kind of reflecting on what my experiences had been like coming into this new kind of environment. And I was able to share that in my company. And it turns out that ended up being helpful to other new people that were joining a company like this for the first time as well. So I think sharing your experiences is always a really valuable thing to take the time to do. What do you think about the initiative, logging on improvement, supplement books, making notes? Journal. I'm not very familiar with this. I'm going to give it a click, but if I'm still not familiar, we may move on. Property-based testing with proper Erlang and Elixir. I see this idea about, is this a question about maybe like taking notes while reading? I'm not totally sure. Yes, taking notes while reading. Yeah, I think again, it's totally up to you and your learning style. If you're reading a book and you find that you don't totally remember everything that you just read, which happens to me a lot, especially with reading programming books, I think taking notes is a great way to go, and just pick the note-taking strategy that works for you. A great option is always like a pen and paper. Maybe you want to use something like, I don't know, does Evernote still exist? Maybe not. Notion, a Google Doc, whatever. Another thing that I've done in the past, and this depends on your environment, is I've started book clubs with team members or, people that I was in classes or boot camp with, even just getting together like one or two friends who all want to read the same programming book, having lunch once a week and talking about a certain number of chapters. Those are all ways to kind of go deeper in what you're learning and help it really get into your brain. Cool. I think that Kimberly can probably help out with that question on how to get more involved in codebar.
Hello. How are you doing? Thank you for that. So if you want to go, you can go to the codebar website, which is here. We use GitHub authentication to sign people in so that we don't have to save passwords and all that jazz. And you can subscribe to chapters, in which case you'll get invites to those workshops, or you can just RSVP to any workshops that you see on the event page. They're 100% remote now, so you can essentially join any location. Isn't an issue anymore. And then when you sign up, you'll be asked what it is that you want to work on, and then we'll pair you with a coach. And you'll get a 2-hour workshop one-to-one with a coach.
So like when when is the code going to be available? How do people sign in to the to the to the website on on building the proposal and all those things? Like I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Do you mean like to write a blog post or to attend a codebar workshop? I'm not sure what you mean.
To write a blog post and attend the workshop and all those things, because like the proposal and all those things, like how do people get signed up to the program? Because like take for example now we're talking now, so like in future time, like how do people keep on how do people keep on like meeting up and getting signed up for the
Yeah, so as I mentioned, if you subscribe to a chapter as either a student or a coach, you'll receive an email invite when those organizers send out invites, and then you can just simply RSVP. There's a button inside the invite, or if you don't want to attend it, you can just delete. Another way is to join our Slack channel, and there's an events channel in there, which I'll share the link now. There's an events channel in there where all events, I always post what events are happening there, or follow us on Twitter. That's another way. There's various things, but whatever event we have is always listed on our events page on the website. So, any up there, you can, once you've signed up on the codebar website, which is through, the GitHub auth, and you create a profile.
Codebar website.
Yeah, the link I've just shared there, codebar.io.
Okay, codebar or slide.
Is that okay? Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, hopefully I'll see you at a workshop soon. I think that's everything. Anything else to add, Sophie?
No, just thank you so much again for having me. This has been so fun. Great questions from all of you guys. Thank you so much for joining me today.